So after 13 years of being the company president of Square Enix, Wada has now left the company after announcing an extraordinary loss in the company's profits. In fact, they now look to make 13 billion yen or 90 million pounds in losses, which is an incredible amount when you think about how large the gaming company is and the amount of different games they put out over a course of just 1 year. And I mean, it's not as bad, but it's also close to Nintendo's $126 million loss, which I believe was last year, if I'm not mistaken. So it's very close to that. So it's obviously an incredible loss, and they're saying that the cause of this were the game sales in the west of the world, which is where I am currently resided, I believe, and I can understand that obviously I can see how that's possible, because when looking at one game in particular, which is Final Fantasy 13 13-2, the awareness of those games, the awareness that they were coming out, there wasn't a very high awareness at all, and in fact I don't think they very much advertised the games heavily. I remember for Final Fantasy 13's first trailer coming out on YouTube about a year before it was about to be released. But that's about it. I never actually saw many. That's the only advertisement I saw for Final Fantasy 13, and the only way I could find out more information about it was by actually Googling it. They didn't have much of an advertisement and awareness campaign for this the Final Fantasy 13 franchise. I'm not well versed in the other games that they've been releasing over the last couple of years. I mean, there's Hitman Absolution, obviously. Sleeping Dogs, and there's the Tomb Raider reboot, which has actually had a lot of advertising. And in fact, I know about the Tomb Raider reboot because I've seen about the same advert about 50 times while watching Sky on my Xbox. For you American viewers, if you don't know what Sky is, it's basically a giant television broadcasting company with many different channels. So I've seen the Tomb Raider reboot's trailer about 50 times watching Sky, and then it just makes me think back to Final Fantasy 13 and 13-2 and how I never saw one trailer for them games on the TV. Final Fantasy 13, I saw the one trailer on YouTube, and then I had to go and Google if I wanted to find more information. And Final Fantasy 13-2, I hadn't even heard about. I hadn't heard about it. I didn't even know it had come out. I didn't even know it was in the making. The only reason that I found out about it, which is when I bought it, is when I went down to Sainsbury's, which is a supermarket, a large supermarket chain in Britain. And I went down there, and it was there. It was only £20. It'd been reduced, so it'd obviously been out for quite a while. And I'm sitting there thinking, when did that come out? I didn't even know they were making a second one. And that is basically, that just goes to show you how much advertisement they obviously put into Final Fantasy 13 13-2, because I'm always on the internet, I'm always on YouTube, I'm always on the Xbox. So, and now the Xbox is, bearing in mind that back then they weren't really advertising on the Xbox, which is true, so I can't really go and say, I can't really add that, but I was always on YouTube and the internet back then, and I never saw an advert for them. So, as much as they can blame the fact that game sales in the West caused their £90 million loss, at the same time it's their own doing in my eyes and in my opinion, because I never once saw an advert for Final Fantasy 13-2, and I saw one for Final Fantasy 13, so it's obvious their advertisement campaigns and their awareness campaigns for the Final Fantasy 13 series were very minimal. And considering Final Fantasy is their flagship franchise, Square Enix, that's the franchise that has made them, what they are, and has made them so much money over the many years that they've been in business. I think it was a terrible idea not to raise much more awareness on the Final Fantasy 13 series, and I don't know if the whole awareness campaign for this Final Fantasy 13-2 really, if the awareness for that game was was minimal because of the fans' reaction to Final Fantasy 13. And I know Final Fantasy 13 was hated on a lot, and to be honest, I still to this day laugh at the many fans that seem to hate on it, because it's not like Final Fantasy 7, it's not like Final Fantasy 10. No, it's Final Fantasy 13. That's why I don't fucking like them, because it's an entirely different fucking franchise. Get your head around it. It's so frustrating to see people go and whine that Final Fantasy 13 is not the same as these other games. Of course it's fucking not. It is a game. It's the first Final Fantasy on the, well, not next generation now, but when it came out, it was on the next generation console, the first HD Final Fantasy, and that's what frustrates me so much. It's like, oh, it's not the same as Final Fantasy 7 and Final Fantasy 10, it's not the same. No, of course not, it's a fucking different franchise. Jesus. And Final Fantasy 13 and 13 too, I will admit, do have their faults, but you can't make a perfect game all the time. Yes, Final Fantasy 7, as I've heard, is such a great game and it's so perfect. But to be honest, I don't even like Final Fantasy 7. I've had a look at it and it doesn't appeal to me. I don't like it. I prefer Final Fantasy 13. I think Final Fantasy 13 is better because everyone has their own opinion. And but I still think that it's annoying that people can whine about Final Fantasy 13 not being the same as the other games. Of course it's not going to be the same. It's an entirely different game. It's still in the same franchise, yes, but it's an entirely different... It's 13, it's not 10, it's 13. It will not be the same as 10. What is the point of making the same game as 13? And then moving on to the battle system, people whining about the battle system, the long hallways, and the story. Well, I think the story of Final Fantasy 13 is brilliant. I love it. It's to me, it's immersive, and I get quite immersed into stories if I just slightly like them. And Final Fantasy 13 2 story was brilliant as well, and it was growing. It was a great, because in Final Fantasy 13 and 13 2 there is sort of this, there's all this story that's sort of sprinkled about very lightly, and it's all hidden in amongst the data log, and you know it's hinted at during the dialogue. And yes, it's not very much, it's not heavily talked about or heavily emphasised, but I do believe that the third in the trilogy, Lightning Returns, Final Fantasy 13, that's coming out this year, will be the one that will, finally bring to light all of these different questions that have plagued the players of Final Fantasy 13 and 13 too, because there is a lot that hasn't been talked about. But I think that they did that on purpose, to be honest, and I think I like being lightly sprinkled with information and slowly wanting to find out more and more what happened, and that's what happened with me. In Final Fantasy 13, there was little hints to Etro and little hints to all these different characters and story, and then in Final Fantasy 13 too, it was, they talked about it a little bit, and you find out who Etro was, and then it was a little bit more lightly sprinkled information. And now I can't wait for Final Fantasy Lightning Returns, because I know that it's the conclusion, it's the conclusive game. It's going to answer all the questions, and it's just going to be awesome. And at first I wasn't looking forward to it, but I've played Final Fantasy 13 and 13 2 again, completed them completely, and now I'm really looking forward to Lightning Returns. I can't wait to find out about the story, because I love it so much. I love the Final Fantasy 13 series, and I think that all of the old fans and people that have played the older Final Fantasy games just can't get over the fact that Square Enix can't sit in the past. They have to move forward. There's a new generation of gamers. They cannot just appeal to the old generation, because as much as I'm sure all the old generation fans think that they're very much cherished by Square Enix, I'm sure they are, they're not the only ones there. For Square Enix have got to think about the new generation. They can't just think, oh yeah, we're just appeal to the old generation and not make our money. They have to make money to keep making these games, and the way they're going to do that is appealing by the new generation to the new generation. And they can't very much do that if they're appealing to just the old generation. So everything that Final Fantasy 13 and 13 2 did, they were trying to appeal to the new generation. That's why the turn-based system was, changed, and it was made a lot more immersive and entertaining. And I hated it at first, because Final Fantasy 12 has always been my favourite Final Fantasy. You can just fight instantly. You don't have to wait, and the fighting system made it flawless, a flawless fight, and you could go anywhere you wanted. It was almost an open world game, Final Fantasy 12. And with Final Fantasy 13, we're back to turn-based and hallways, and I had to enter a fight. I had to enter a different loading screen and enter a battlefield. But I didn't have a problem with that, because the way that they did it was actually very entertaining for me, and it was definitely appealing to me as a new Final Fantasy player, because I'd only played Final Fantasy 12. So I think they did really well with the Final Fantasy 13 series, and I'm really looking forward to Lightning Returns. I think that all of the old gamers are a bunch of whiny bitches that just can't stand the fact that Square Enix have to appeal to the newer generation and make their games more entertaining, and of course they have to. And they can't just stick with the old, because let's face it, if Final Fantasy X came out now, not all players, the new generation, not a lot of them are going to be appealed to it, because it just the way things are now, they're just not going to be appealed to that type of gameplay. Saying that though, Final Fantasy Lightning, the future of Square Enix's releases will be Final Fantasy 13 Lightning Returns. You've got Final Fantasy 10 and 10 HD, the relaunch of Final Fantasy 14. And then, obviously, there's actually hints of the Final Fantasy Versus 13 project as well. So there's a lot of Final Fantasy games that are going to be coming out quite soon. It's a very Final Fantasy heavy year for Square Enix, and I'm hoping, obviously, that they make profit, because they're one of my most favourite gaming companies, gaming producers, and I don't want them to be in loss all the time. But I do think that they've got to start making awareness. They have to make these games, the game generation, more aware of these games that are going to come out. Because when you look at Final Fantasy 13 and 13 too, the awareness on those games was not very high at all. In fact, I didn't even know about Final Fantasy 13 2 till I saw it in the store. So that's the amount of awareness that they did in Britain. I don't know what it was like in America, but there was no awareness over here. So I think that's where they went wrong, and where they've got to improve on. And Lightning Returns has had a lot, not an incredible amount, because it isn't exactly going to be released yet. I think it's got a couple of months till release, but it has had quite a bit of awareness on YouTube, and there's definitely been more awareness on Lightning Returns than there has been on Final Fantasy 13 and 13 too. And I don't know if what they were trying to do is with 13 was bring it out with not as much awareness, so that it was sort of like, wow, bang, look at this is here now, and then everyone would sort of, suddenly see it and go nuts and buy it because it was different and the graphics were awesome and stuff. But I just don't think that was a very, if that's what they were aiming to do. It was obviously not a very good tactic, because not many people were aware of it, and it just sort of appeared, and it was just like, oh, I've not really heard about this, and the hype wasn't built up in the gamers to actually go and want to buy it. So I think that's where they went wrong, and that's where they've got to sort of improve on their awareness. And so the new Square Enix president is actually a former company president I'm not sure if he was formerly company president of Square Enix. I guess he is, Yosuke Matsuda. He must be he was a former company president of Square Enix, I'm guessing, and now he's taken the seat. So if he was a former company president, so that means he would have been in the 90s, and the 90s were when Square Enix were doing incredibly well. So let's just hope that that now that he's president again, he'll bring their greatness back into swing, and he'll be able to make all of their games, not just the Final Fantasy series, but Final Fantasy series mostly, bring it back to life. And I am hoping that they can sort of get back on track. And I think where they're going to get back on track is probably, although I hate to admit it, Final Fantasy 13 Versus, or I believe they changed it to Final Fantasy just Versus, although as it's put on this Eurogamer.net, it's Final Fantasy Versus 13. I heard that it was actually in the same world as Final Fantasy 13. I'm not sure, because I haven't really looked into the project, because I haven't really been that interested in it, to be honest. I'm not sure. Final Fantasy 13 is the one I've been interested in, and I'm already quite annoyed, because I do believe that Final Fantasy 13 has now just been turned into a profit-making machine to fund Final Fantasy Versus 13, which aggravates me a lot, because as much as, Final Fantasy Versus 13 is very hyped up, and a lot of gamers looking forward to it, a lot of Final Fantasy people looking forward to it, you don't just go, and pardon, that's my dog, you don't just go and use the other franchise to make money for that franchise, because in a sense, maybe some of the faults that have come through in Final Fantasy 13 and 13-2 are because of that, because 13 could have been used to fund versus 13 as well, because I don't know how long it's been in production, I don't know how long they've actually been trying to make it. But if you have a franchise, if you have if you have a series of games, Final Fantasy 13, then that is a series of games. You do not just not focus on it and just quickly whack it out, because if you look, Final Fantasy 13-2 came out within 2 years of Final Fantasy 13, and Lightning Returns is coming out 2 years after 13-2. That is just not a very long gaming production time. When you look at Final Fantasy 13, 12 came out back in 2006, 13 came out in 2010, was it? It was a 4-year gap, or more, and it didn't come out 2 years after 12. And if they want to appeal to everyone, and if they want to make their money, then they should put just as much effort into they should put just as much effort into 13 as they do Versus. They shouldn't be using it, and it's a very dirty thing to go and use 13 as a profit machine just to fund Versus 13. If they can't afford to put both of the games into production and focus both of them heavily, then they should leave one out until that they can actually afford to put them both into. They should leave one out until they have the money to be able to put that one into production and focus on it heavily and make sure that it's perfect. Because I do believe that they have been using the Final Fantasy 13 franchise to profit Versus 13, and I'm sure a lot of the other fans are like, well, I don't care because I just want 13, and that's fine. It's a very selfish opinion, a very selfish thing to say, but there's a lot of people that do like the 13 series, and if Square Enix are ruining that series just because they want to focus on 13 and make a profit for it with the 13 series, it's not very fair on the people that do like Final Fantasy 13. Sadly, 13 and 13-2 are now out, and there's nothing that we can do about that. I'm just hoping that Lightning Returns, they haven't just quickly made it so that they can profit Versus 13, because I like Final Fantasy 13 series, and I'm going to like it more than Versus 13. I will probably get Versus 13 because it's very much hyped up, and because it's in the Final Fantasy world, Final Fantasy 13 world, and it's part of the Novella Chrysalis. Is it Chrysalis? Novella Chrysalis series or something? And so I will get it just for that fact. It's not because it's a very hyped up game. It is because it's part of the Final Fantasy 13 world, and it's part of the Novella Chrysalis. I don't know what it's called. The Nova Crystal series, or whatever it is, of Final Fantasy 13. Final Fantasy, and obviously Final Fantasy 13 is also a part of that series. So that's the only reason that I will probably purchase that game. But I just hope that they haven't used Lightning Returns as another profit-making tool. To be honest, if they were trying to make a profit out of it, they did a very lousy job, because they didn't make the games, but they didn't make anyone very aware of them, as I said before. So anyway, that was just my take on this whole happening. I do believe that Wada, the ex-president now, did a very lousy job of trying to make his games well known. The other games that they have brought out, like Sleeping Dogs and Hitman Absolution, I didn't even know about, and a bunch of games that they brought out I didn't know very much about, probably because I wasn't looking for them. But that's the whole reason of awareness campaigns, is to make players aware of these games so they do go looking for more information on them. And sadly, with Final Fantasy 13 and 13-2, in that case, they didn't make it very aware. In fact, they just sort of they're in the stores now. You can go buy it. It's there. Don't need to make people aware of it at all. And that's the problem, because Final Fantasy is it's their flagship franchise, and they should be making as many people aware as they can when a new Final Fantasy game comes out, so they can get more people to enjoy the franchise and keep buying the Final Fantasy franchise. The Final Fantasy franchise games. They need to build up the awareness of Final Fantasy, and they didn't do that with their last two Final Fantasy games, their last two big ones. with Final Fantasy Lightning Returns, however, it seems to have got a little bit more awareness, and I'm just hoping that within when it comes to 2 months until it's released, that they'll really hammer the awareness and advertisement campaigns and just like slam and have it everywhere about Lightning Returns, because it's the conclusion of a very good Final Fantasy series, and I'm looking forward to it. So yeah, that about does it. I hope you enjoyed my my little. I don't know if it'd be a rant. I guess it's a bit of a rant. I'll be doing more of these whenever I see something that interests me and I'd like to talk about it. So if you did enjoy, please do comment. I'd like to hear what you guys thought. Although, because comments are quite limited, if you'd like to make a video response, please do. I'd love to have video responses to this. And rate and subscribe if you'd like to see more content from me. So until next time, goodbye.